Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and this video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous 12 hours. We have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about the Kupiansk direction, because during the previous night we received a significant number of very interesting details and updates, so let's start. Today was the video. Today the pro-Ukrainian sources published the video of how the Russians managed to break through the Ukrainian defense belt and basically to enter almost the central part of the city of Kupiansk. This is the video I'm talking about. In this video, exactly in this episode, we can see at least 3 Russian vehicles that were heading towards the city of Kupiansk. They started their trip from the village of Liman Pershi and they were moving in the southwestern direction. As you can see, while the Russians were moving, the Ukrainians were trying to stop the Russians, to slow them down and to destroy maybe, but we see that nothing worked out and the Russians answered this settlement. Now let's return back on map, and this is exactly the final seconds of the video. Once again, let's take a look at the video, and this is the final episode of the Russian vehicles almost in the central part of the city of Kupiansk, and this is exactly the place. And according to the video, the Russians on the final episode were moving in the northeastern direction. So basically the Russians were returning back. So this is the situation, most likely somewhere further in the south, somewhere in the vicinity of these buildings. Maybe the Russians landed infantry and then the Russian vehicles were trying to return back towards the village of Sinkovka or the village of Liman Pershi. The Russians began their offensive once again from Liman Pershi. They were moving along this line between the 3 lines along the railways, and then they entered somewhere the territory of Kupiansk. It's very difficult to understand. The video doesn't show us this, and after that, in the final episode, the Russians were returning back from this point. And based on this video, a lot of military experts, a lot of mappers have adjusted their maps in Russian favor, but I would like to discuss with you several things that people are losing while discussing and talking about this video. First, let's talk about the changes on the map. Based on this map, based on the video we've just seen, I made the conclusion that most likely the entire forest between Sinkovka, the river Voskol, and the village of Liman Pershi was captured by the Russians. So these are the changes on the ground in comparison between before the video and after the video. So the entire forest was colored as a contested area, and the pro-Ukrainian sources and neutral sources confirmed Russian control, but without any videos. And this morning, of Ukrainian time, Moscow time, we have adjusted the map in Russian favor based on this video of attack. Now let's talk about different updates that were published by neutral mappers. For example, neutral mappers reported that indeed the Russians managed to take under control at least this part of Kupiansk. There are several, there is a river Gnilitsa, there is a forest, some forest belts, railways, something like this, nothing special. As for the territory of northern Kupiansk itself, nobody, neither pro-Ukraine mappers, neutral mappers, pro-Russian mappers adjusted their maps of this territory in Russian favor. Everybody shows just a small corridor, let's say from these positions to the last location, showing like a possible area of control, but obviously it's impossible to control just the railways. There are a few options. Either the Russians established complete control over the northern part, or that was something like a tricky attack from the Russian side with completely different purposes. So this is the situation, and these are events, explanations that you might have seen already in the open sources. But I would like to remind you one important thing that most likely I believe you forgot about. I was talking about 4 days ago on the 11th of November, and I would like to remind you about this once again. For this, we need to rewind the updates on the 11th of November, and maybe you will remember everything. On the 11th of November, I pointed your attention that some very reliable Russian resources stated that Russian troopers have secured a position on the outskirts of the city near the Oskol Stadium. A little to the east, the northern outskirts of the village of Petropavlovka are being stormed. And if you remember, we discussed that there is a stadium. I was telling you that it's a football or soccer stadium. This is it. This is the construction. And I told you that some Russian sources reported that somehow the Russians managed to break through to the territory of this stadium, and the Russians managed to dig in deeper. And I told you that as for now, we're not going to adjust the map because it was very difficult to understand where exactly the Russians managed to dig in deeper. But I told you that let's keep this information in our minds, because if that information was correct, sooner or later we would receive additional updates. And today, on the 14th of November, we received the first updates that confirm the Russian progress in this area. You know that pro-Ukrainian sources, when they realized this huge problem with the Russian breakthrough, first they publish updates that the Russians entered the territory of Kupiansk, and now they start publishing information that Ukrainians managed to, let's say, defeat the Russians and to force them to fall back. Of course, I believe that as for now, as for the current updates from pro-Ukrainian sources, these are just pure propaganda, nothing more. So anyway, we understand that during the previous 4 days, from 11th till the 14th of November, we received at least 2 updates that confirm Russian control over the northern part of Kupiansk, over this citadel with a high-rise building area. If this information is correct, then the Ukrainians in the very near future will begin suffering the biggest problems ever. Why is that? First of all, the Russians, if they control this part, most likely manage to establish physical control or fire control over the road N26. Of course, the bridges were already destroyed a long time ago. But from these positions, from the positions around the N26 road, the Russians have possibilities, and most likely they have already done this, establish complete control over supply and support of the Ukrainian forces in the village of Petropavlovka and further in the eastern direction. If the Russians are able to dig in deeper in the territory of the northern Kupiansk, if the Russians are able to repel any Ukrainian counterattack in this area, if the Russians are able to expand a little bit their positions there, then most likely the Ukrainian forces that are currently located on the territory of Petropavlovka are caught at least into operational encirclement, because most likely they have complete absence of any logistic and any support from the mainland. Now they need both to retreat, or they will stay there forever, or to surrender, nothing more. So the situation has become very critical for the Ukrainians, and now it's very difficult to understand how are they going to fix this. Furthermore, we see that the Russians continue pressure from the southeastern part of the Kupiansk direction. Today, the Russians managed to improve their positions to the east of the village of Glushkovka. At least we have geolocation that confirmed this. The video was published by the pro-Ukrainian sources, probably of the 14th Mechanized Brigade or Artillery Brigade, and the Ukrainians were bombing and attacking the Russian edge positions along this tree line. Based on this video, we have adjusted this part of Kupiansk area in Russian favor. This territory, most of this territory used to be in contested zone, contested area, but now we have 100% proofs about complete control by the Russian forces. The situation for the Ukrainians is getting very, very difficult. Now let's move further. Let's discuss a few words about the Sudzha direction, because we have a little changes. I know that I was talking with my team about the situation in Kursk direction. There are lots of interesting things, lots of very interesting updates. For example, today and during the previous days, and since the beginning of the third counteroffensive, we were receiving lots of updates that most likely the Ukrainians, there is Ukrainian forces that are currently located in this forest between Olgovka, Kremyanoye and Novoivanovka, and they are encircled. They're, let's say, in defense. The Ukrainians most likely are trying somehow to counterattack and to restore communications with them. Most likely the Ukrainians will not be able to do this, but anyway, this is something interesting that is happening here. Furthermore, during the previous day, we got a significant number of videos of how the Russians were trying to attack the Ukrainian positions in the next defense belt, and you know that most of those attacks were repelled by the Ukrainians. The Russians suffered the significant losses. Lots of tanks vehicles were destroyed as a result of anti-tank missiles, as a result of mine explosions, artillery strikes, and FPV drone strikes, and so on. And as you can see, we also have some changes on the ground, and as you can see, according to, for example, neutral mappers, the Russians managed to cut the village of Leonidova and Alexandria from the villages of Lebedivka and Sverdlikova by taking under control this part of the small river. So what I'm trying to tell you, if the Russians are going to continue offensive operation in the Sudzha direction the same way as we can see right now, very likely that the Sudzha is going to turn for for the Russians for their personal Robotina. We know that Robotina is the small village in the Zaporozhye direction where the Ukrainians, while trying to break through the Russian defense belt towards the city of Tokmak, suffered the significant losses, and that was the main battle of the village for the village of 2023. And then Ukrainians lost up to 60 or maybe 100,000 soldiers just during the battle for the counteroffensive. And now we see that maybe the story is repeating, but now the story repeats for Russians. Indeed, they're suffering significant losses, and let's wait for more updates. Maybe the Russians are going to will be much more successful in comparison with the Ukrainians, and in the end they will be able to cut the Sudzha salient, but it's open question which price the Russians are going to pay for this. Now let's discuss the Pokrovsk direction, because during the previous 24 hours we have additional changes, and as we discussed, the most important stronghold for now is the territory on this intersection of roads, which is under responsibilities of the 72nd Mechanized Brigade and 33rd Mechanized Brigade, and we discussed that the Russians are planning to attack in the direction of the stronghold of this dense network of the fortifications, and if the Russians are able to block or to cut this territory, then it's going to be the final game for the Ukrainians on the entire direction. And we were waiting when exactly the Russians are planning to make this attack, and today we start receiving updates, at least from pro-Ukrainian mappers, that indeed the Russians began moving. So as you can see, we have adjusted the map based on the confirmed control by Deep State. So this is the territory that is contested area that was shown by the Deep State as captured by the Russians. But I would like to point your attention on the area of the gray zone, and according to the gray zone, currently the clashes between the Russians and the Ukrainians are taking place already for this stronghold. So there are already clashes between the 72nd Mechanized and Russian units. So it's very difficult and complicated situation for now. Obviously they will not count losses, because if they lose this dense network of the fortifications, this entire artillery pocket would be caught in cauldron with a significant number of Ukrainians inside of it. Furthermore, the Russians are trying to attack from Dalnya to the northern stronghold, and Ukrainians are trying to counterattack, and during the previous night we received a significant number of videos of how the Russians were destroying Ukrainian tanks and vehicles, most likely of the 33rd Mechanized Brigade. In this video we can see one Ukrainian tank that was heading towards the Russian positions with the purpose to attack the Russians within a distance, not to allow them to cut the road physically, not to allow the Russians to take under control the stronghold, but this vehicle was destroyed as a result of Lancet strike, or at least was damaged. In this video we can see another Ukrainian tank that also came to the village of Dalnya with the purpose to bring the Russians down within a distance with a tank fire, but this tank was also destroyed, or at least damage, as a result of Lancet strike. A little bit further northwestern direction we have another tank of Armored Forces of Ukraine that was sent in the direction of the village by the name of Dalnya with the purpose to slow down the Russians, and this tank was also destroyed as a result of Lancet strike. So we see this is the focal point right now, not the city of Kurakhova. Nobody cares right now for the city of Kurakhova. Now the focal point is Uspenovka, and the Russian attempts to attack from the north and the Russian attempt to attack from the south. If these two strongholds are being captured by the Russians, this is going to be the biggest disaster ever since the beginning, probably, of the special military operation for the Armored Forces of Ukraine. Now let's move further, and we are going to discuss the situation in the Zaporozhye direction, where we can see additional changes on the ground that were made based on the video that was published by the Ukrainians. In this video we can see several FPV drone attacks on the Russian forces that were located between these three lines and these fortifications, and based on this video we have adjusted the map, and as you can see the dynamic in this area is very big. So this is the situation by the end of 11th of November, this is by the end of the 13th of November, and this is by the beginning of the 14th of November. The Russians are moving and heading further in the direction of the village by the name of Zelene Pole. And you know that this morning we start receiving very interesting updates from pro-Russian resources, and the Russians are saying that currently they're trying to carry out a very powerful attack in the direction of Zelene Pole, and maybe this upcoming day we're gonna receive crazy updates exactly from these three villages, Zelene Pole, Novopol and Novodarivka. Once again, I remind you that if the Russians somehow are able to take under control this territory, this is going to be the biggest disaster for the Ukrainians, because the village of Velika Novosulovka would be caught in cauldron, and most likely the Ukrainians will not be able to counterattack with the purpose to restore their lost positions. And that's it for the short video. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching, subscribe to my channel, put your likes to my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.